Podcasting 101 with me, your host, Rachel. This podcast is for female business owners and solopreneurs that are looking to start a podcast that adds to your own already awesome offering. I'll give you helpful advice that you can take away and use in your podcasting journey. I hope to answer those tricky questions that just keep you from starting. Once a month, I'll be joined by other female podcasters. They'll share their journey with you and offer tips and advice they discovered along the way. Let's get started. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode. This week, I'm looking at how do I plan my podcast. In a previous episode, I covered 5 things you need to do before you start your podcast. And just to recap, those were, have you got time for a podcast? Why do you want to start a podcast? Who is your podcast for, which is your target audience? What are your podcast goals? Like, what do you want to achieve? And what's it going to be about? So once you've got those things, you've got a good idea of those 5 things, now you can move into the nitty gritty of planning. Podcasting is a long game and you need to make it work for at least 12 months. I was talking about this on a previous episode. You do need that commitment of 12 months to make it work and to be consistent throughout those 12 months. Consistency is key, as with everything. I'm sure with your marketing as well, you'll know that being consistent works well. If your audience knows that you're going to be there and you're going to turn up, it's always more beneficial. And that doesn't mean you have to do it like with social media. It doesn't mean you have to post every day to be consistent. You find the consistency that works for you, and the same goes for your podcast. You find what consistency works for you and you try to stick to that. So things you can move on to now is looking at the type of episode that you want to do. I've talked about this in a previous episode. So it was last week's, talking about the length of the episode, the frequency and the format. If you haven't listened to that episode, hit pause and go back and listen to it. It just delves into a little bit more detail on the things you can think about around your particular episodes and what you want your episodes to be like. Then you can move on to specific episode topics. What I did for this podcast is I mapped out 12 months. I put together all the questions that I thought that you guys would be asking when wanting to start a podcast or being in a podcast. What are those questions that you would put into Google or you would want answering or that keep you up at night? So that was my aim, is to answer those questions. So this episode is a great example. You might be wondering, how do I plan my episode? How do I plan my podcasts? And this episode is here to help you to do just that. So whatever your podcast topic is, map out the episodes. You don't necessarily have to go into the exact specifics of the episodes, but it's writing out your knowledge for those episodes and then put them in a spreadsheet or whatever you want to use to organise your episodes. And this is where you can mark out, you may be having guests every week. You might be having them once a month like myself, or maybe you've decided to do a series and you want to start with one series and then you go by season and then you go on to another season. So if you don't want to commit to 12 months, then perhaps you might want to commit to a series of X amount of episodes and you figure out a theme for that series and you plan that series out. And then you can have a hiatus and then where you can plan your next series and then go back to it. And when you do your research for your episodes, it's keeping your ideal client in mind, your audience in mind, just to make sure that you are creating your podcast for them. I would then recommend, once you've got your episodes planned out and what you're going to do, I would block time out to record and batch record. I am batch recording right now. This is the 3rd episode I've recorded in one sitting. Especially with a weekly podcast, it is easy to get behind and life always gets in the way. I wanted to record these actually even earlier, but some of you may know that I went on holiday skiing, had no accident skiing. Well, I didn't actually ski a lot, so that's probably why. But on my last night, tripped down the stairs and poured hot mint tea on my foot and then burnt it. So I had a very badly scalded foot for about 2 weeks, which was all around the time I was supposed to be recording and batching all my episodes to be super organised. So that kind of set me back a little bit. But now I've managed to get in and I've written down exactly what I needed to achieve by what date. And now I have made the time to do that. And that's what you need to do. And that now has given me about 4 weeks notice, 4 or 5 weeks I've got in the bank there, which gives me enough time to get the next lot sorted. And once you get into, I think it's setting up that initial plan and that you will get into the routine of, perhaps you might go, right, Monday is my day to record my episodes. It's the day I'm going to have all my guests on. And then I know where I am and I'm going to do it on a 3 weekly basis. Perhaps you're outsourcing your editing, in which case you just need to make sure you've got time to record and then send them to your podcast manager with enough time for them to work their magic and get it scheduled or uploaded to whichever platform you're deciding to get it out there on. If you have guests, this is a really good tip. Now, I've devised a guest process that I follow for when I invite a guest onto my show. It's been developed over the first few people that I've asked to be interviewed. And it kind of started when I was helping one of my clients with a different project, but still a kind of guest process. And I thought, actually, this is what I need for my podcast. I have prepared some information that they might need to let them know the direction the questions are going to take, just some simple advice about microphones and headphones. I mean, I'm lucky in the fact that my guests are other podcasters, so they actually, or they should know, and I'm sure they do know, the benefits of using microphones and headphones and things like that. So they will have a good knowledge of those things anyway. But I like to send it as a little reminder and like turning notifications off and things like that. But for you guys, if you're asking guests, they may never been on a podcast before. They don't have their own podcast, so they might not know these things. So it's always just nice to gently remind them. I designed mine in Canva, so it's a nice pretty PDF in my brand colours for my podcast. Then I send that out with the email, with the information. I would also advise using an appointment scheduler. If you're not already using one of these, what are you doing? I absolutely love these appointment schedulers. So my favourite is Calendly. There are a few out there. There's Acuity as well, and I think TidyCal. And they are just make your life so much easier. Also now though, specifically for my podcast guests, as I mentioned in a previous episode, now I'm using Captivate. They have a guest booking system within the platform. So this has streamlined my process, and also it's got a great thing where you can add things on for the guest to fill in, and you can get them to add in all their social links and their website and things like that, so that when you go to add them to your episode, you can add the guest to their episode and it will have all their social links. You don't have to get those twice or go and find them, which is really handy. I like to ask my guests for a photo and a bio, which I can put in the show notes, and then I can use the photo to promote them on social media. And I have decided to do individual cover art for each episode, for my guest episodes, to personalise those. So then I've got a graphic I've designed to have an image of the person that's coming on to be interviewed. So that's a little bit about what my guest process is. I've also done all the emails that are going to go out. I've got some templates and I've put in all the information I want to ask. So that is like a really handy tip, I think. You need to decide on what equipment you're going to use. If you are going to invest in a microphone, which headphones you're going to use, what are you going to use to record your episodes? How are you going to edit your episodes if you're not outsourcing this to somebody else? Those are the things that you need to think about before you start. Obviously, you need that for recording, but then afterwards to make sure it doesn't become a thing that once you've recorded it, how am I going to edit it now? How am I going to get it out there now? So the next one is the hosting platform. So where are you going to publish your episode from? Are you going to use Captivate like I am, which is a paid for service? Or am I going to use a free service like Anchor or Alitu? There's a few different platforms, as I've mentioned before, to choose from. I will look at these in a future episodes in a little bit more detail to give you a better idea of what is involved in each of those. But I would just advise you to do your own research. There is a lot of information out there on YouTube and obviously our favourite search engine, Google. So I would just make sure, just have a little look and see which one suits you at this stage in your journey. Cover art, I mentioned that briefly, and your branding, that is an important thing to kind of get decided. There are certain specifications for artwork for Apple Podcasts and in Captivate. I will leave some information about that in the show notes so you can find that there. I do all my design work in Canva, and that is where I designed my logo for the podcast, and I created different social media posts. That is quite important, which leads into the marketing. You need to have an idea of what marketing you want to do for your podcast. It's really important that you tell everybody about your podcast and that you shout about it on your social media. Using tools like audiograms, quotes from the episode in a graphic that's, from your branding. Doing a little video talking about the main points. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here either. You can make your podcast works for you in your big piece of content that you do. And then you are effectively repurposing that content. You can pick bits out of it, especially if you've got a guest interview. There's a lot of information in there that you can use for social media captions to promote your podcast and show your listeners, what are the best bits out of that podcast that's going to get them to go, actually, this is really speaking to me and I want to listen to the rest of that. Those bits are really important to follow up on and have a little plan in place. So I have designed templates, a few different templates like Instagram posts, Instagram story posts, and then I will adapt them for each episode and for each guest. And then I transcribe my episodes using Otter, which, if you haven't heard about it, is a brilliant transcription service. I will put a link to that in the show notes. And then I use that to help pick out the points for my show notes and then for my social media and for my marketing. Once you've done all of this, you'll be in a really good place to start. You're clear on where you are now and what you need to do going forward. A little tip is you could use a project management tool like Asana or Trello to help you organise all of this out. I tend to use Asana, but Trello is very, very similar. I know a lot of people that use Trello for their podcast. Also, a lot of podcast managers use it with their clients, and it's an easy way to get an overview of what needs to be done and what has got achieved. I will put a little link to both of those tools in the show notes so that you can check them out for yourself if you don't already know them. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you have any further questions around this subject, please let me know, DM me, email me. All my social links are in the show notes. See you next time. Bye. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please like, share and subscribe. Your support means so much to me. If there's a question or topic you'd like covering, then I'd love to hear from you. Find the podcast on Instagram @RachelBotfield and drop me a DM. Till next time. Bye.